Welcome to another episode at the Rise of the Ageless Starman. Today I host David Golan, the co-founder and CTO of Viz.AI, a telehealth company that provides a service that improves the stroke treatment. David is going to explain us how their product works and the importance to get out of a stroke with as less damage as possible to the patient, which will later on in his life will be crucial to preserve a good cognition ability and healthy life. David, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, David, you are quite young, and I know you got one data for the listeners that you got 100 score in the psychometric test. So yeah, I guess everything was open to you. You could study everything you want, go to each direction you want. How did you decide to go to healthcare, health tech?
Um, it's a good question. So obviously, it was not my first choice. The psychometric test was probably 15 years ago, and since then I've done I had a few stops in my career. I was in the tech industry. I then did first, second, and a PhD degrees in Tel Aviv University and the postdoc at Stanford. And at Stanford, I met my co-founder, and we started Viz.AI with the goal of improving healthcare and improving stroke care specifically. So I've had a lot of different adventures, and each one I learned something, and everything ended up being useful in the Viz journey.
Yeah, and let's just explain that 800 is the maximum score. Did they tell you how many people got it besides you?
I have no idea. I think it's a few dozens every time. I don't know. I don't know exactly.
I think it's less. You need to, yeah.
I don't know.
Don't underestimate the the score. Okay, so like your product is about the treatment of stroke. So explain us a little bit, how does it work?
Yeah. Awesome. So just like 2 minutes of background on stroke and why it's a big deal. So stroke happens when blood flow to the brain is obstructed, typically by a clot that gets stuck in a blood vessel in the brain. It's a very time-critical condition. The brain is a very sensitive tissue and it dies very rapidly. So there's a need to unblock the vessels very, very, very quickly. It's it's typically number 3 or number 4 killer in the Western world, and it's the number 1 healthcare expense. So if you look at all the others, because stroke creates many times it doesn't kill the patient. The patient is left with a severe disability, which generates a lot of misery for the patient and their family, but also a lot of costs for the healthcare system, for the patient, and for their family. So it's a big, big, big tragedy and a big focus of healthcare systems. It's the most time-critical condition in all of medicine, with the exception of choking on a grape. So every 1 minute that the treatment is delayed, the patient loses on average 4.2 days of healthy life, which is nuts. 4.2 days. And the cost to the healthcare system, only the direct costs alone, for every 1 minute of delay is over $1,000. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously a big deal. We want to identify those patients very, very fast. We want to treat them very, very fast. And we have an amazing treatment. An amazing treatment is like almost science fiction. That's called mechanical thrombectomy. So mechanical thrombectomy, what the surgeon does is they make a small incision in the groin, and they take a catheter, which is essentially a wire, and they navigate it all the way up to the brain. They get to the clot that's blocking the brain, and they engage the clot and remove it either by a suction or other mechanisms, and they restore flow to the brain. And if they do it fast enough, they can save enough of the brain. And like I said, every minute that goes by, more brain is dead. So, we said we have this condition, it's very serious. We have a treatment, we have a financial and clinical incentive. So, you and the listeners might ask, why, what's the problem? And the problem is getting the patient to the doctor that can treat them. And the problem is that patients, fast enough. And the problem is that patients typically show up at the nearest hospital, depending on where you are, but you'll probably get transferred to the nearest hospital. And that hospital can do the diagnosis. They can scan you and they can make a diagnosis, but typically they cannot treat you. Only very large healthcare centers can give you the mechanical thrombectomy because it's a subspecialty. You need equipment, you need personnel. So the way this works, you need to be triaged from your local hospital to a bigger hospital. And remarkably, this is where most delays happen. Anyone who's been in the hospital, there can be delays, there can be communication issues. You have people from the smaller hospitals who are fairly low in the chain of command of the healthcare system, and they're trying to push their patients to the top of the pyramid, which is the large, lucrative healthcare center where you have the neurosurgeon or the neurointerventionist, like the most busy person in the pyramid. So there's just huge delays, and typically the average time it takes from when a patient is scanned to the time the physician knows about them for the first time, we're talking hours.
Yeah,
this is hours of delay, and every minute goes by, it's 4.2 days of disability added. So you have this very, very challenging logistical orchestration task that needs to happen. And we at Viz, we developed a solution that basically connects everybody together. So what happens when you install the Viz.AI software at the hospital, it connects all the hospitals. All the scans go to the cloud immediately, and they're analyzed by our artificial intelligence engine. And the engine can identify which patients have a stroke and which patients don't. And the software alerts the specialist that sits at the top of the pyramid on the stroke case almost immediately, within 3 to 4 minutes. So what happens is we replace a process that's extremely serial, where the ER physician tries to push the patient all the way up the pyramid, I would say, to a process that is becoming from a push process to a pull process. The head of the pyramid now knows about the patient in a few minutes, and they reach out and they call the ER at the small hospital and say, hey, you have a patient with a stroke that I can treat. Let's work together to transfer the patient. And in some cases, they even do it before the ER knows that the scan is completed. So this is really, really accelerating stroke care. We're now installed in over 600 hospitals in the US.
Wow.
So we're now seeing a wave of publications of places that implemented Viz.AI and are comparing their performance pre-Viz and post-Viz, and are seeing time savings of 20, 30, sometimes 60 minutes.
Wow.
So they're improving time to treatment, they're seeing better patient outcomes, they're treating more patients, and at the end of the day, what matters is the patients, and the patients are doing better when they implement the system.
Yeah. And you say you are doing it only in the US for now, or what other countries?
Yeah, so for now we're in the US. We have plans to expand pretty aggressively in 2021.
Yeah, nice. Because a little bit from my research, and like your product is it has a big potential, like in develop country, because the average age is raising up now, and they start to get to the point that they need those solutions, that they
Yes.
have a lot more strokes and heart attacks and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
it's true. I mean, generally, stroke is a big problem everywhere. Um, you know, as countries become more developed and healthcare is becoming more accessible, yes, you definitely um, need ways to deliver the care to the people that need it for stroke and for many other conditions. And I agree that developing countries actually have an opportunity to sort of leapfrog into the future and
yeah,
build an infrastructure that's built for advanced technology. It's actually very interesting
yeah,
and a very exciting time.
nice. So a little bit about the company, the team. Are you international?
Um, yeah, so we're an international company. We're two founders. Our CEO, Chris Mancy, is a neurosurgeon and a British neurosurgeon, and I'm Israeli, and we met at Stanford, in the US. We have an R&D center in Tel Aviv. That's about 70 people, and we have a commercial team, and a lot of the rest of the operation is in the US. I would say used to be in San Francisco, but now with COVID-19, everybody's working from home and they're all over the US. And as now we're moving to Europe, moving to other places, we're opening new offices around the world. So it's exciting time for us, a time of a lot of growth. Yeah, and I think we're almost 200 people now all across the globe.
And did COVID changed a little bit how the product works?
Um, so COVID, the core product that I described didn't change. That people still get strokes, and stroke is acute enough to show up at the hospital even if you're afraid of COVID-19. Many other things did change. So one thing is that we did launch in March a COVID-19 solution, a COVID-19 product that was assisting the care teams, the communication and viewing of images, because they were trying to keep people remote to reduce the infections. And I mean, it's a bigger discussion, but definitely especially in the US, what hospitals care about in terms of finances and the impact COVID-19 had on budgets, it changed things. But now, I mean, in terms of the growth of the company, it didn't really impact us. There's a lot of other opportunities. For example, hospitals are now putting more emphasis on teleradiology. And in a sense, our platform can be seen as teleradiology on steroids or AI-powered teleradiology. So we're seeing some places that are adopting it for that purpose. Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely challenges. Internally, a lot of stuff changed. We're working from home. We are now doing everything remotely. We used to travel to hospitals to train them, to install the system. Now we're doing everything remotely because we're not allowed in hospitals anymore, and we don't want to be on planes. So it did change a lot, and it made us, I think, a way more agile and way more lean company in many, many ways. Because if you don't travel, you can support more customers and you can install more customers. So it's actually been an interesting experience.
It forced you to improve.
Yep, definitely.
And so in terms of research, like if your product analyzes the stroke, you think in the future you will give there will be benefit from the data for predicting or understanding better strokes?
Yeah, so I think the answer is definitely yes. So we're I wouldn't say slowly, but quickly, but surely we're generating the world's largest data on stroke patients. We're seeing tens of thousands of patients every month through the system. So there's definitely a lot of research questions that people can ask. And, working with a lot of academics and researchers in the stroke world, they're coming to us with hypotheses and things like, what would be an algorithm that would really change stroke care for them, and stuff like that. And I'll give you an example. So one example is a very critical um, data point for stroke treatment is what's called the last known well. That's the moment that the stroke hit, the onset of the stroke, right? Because as the stroke, as time progresses, the brain accumulates damage. So we really want to know, we're treating people based on how much time passed from the stroke. But in many, many, many cases, you don't know, right? We have what we call wake-up strokes. So someone who woke up and the spouse realized they had a stroke. We don't know if the stroke happened at 5 a.m. or at 10 p.m. And that makes all of the difference in what therapies they're eligible to. So that's one option. The other option, someone was alone when the stroke happened, right? So we try to investigate what's the last known well, who's the last person who saw them alive, who saw them well, so we can decide on treatment. Or if someone doesn't speak English, for example, and they show us alone at the hospital or with, unconscious. So that's a data point that the physicians often miss. And a lot of times when I ask people, what is your dream, what AI can do for you, if you like your wildest fantasy, they say, I want to know the onset of the stroke based on the scans. And I give you the scans, you tell me 5 hours, 7 hours, 12 hours, so I can know how to treat the patient. So I mean, that's something that's very futuristic, but would be very interesting. A lot of the times they're talking about, tell me which therapies will work, right? Based on the brain, based on the imaging, based on what you see. What can we say? Based on, you see the imaging, you see the brain, sometimes you can really see the properties of the clot in the brain. Can we predict which drug or which therapy or which treatment would work better for this specific clot? So definitely, I think there's a lot to be done for stroke, specifically, but we're just scratching the surface of what we can do in healthcare with AI.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and of course, it's amazing that you have such a big data and you can provide insight. I saw on the website you have a demo. What does it include? Like what someone who wants to use it and try?
Yeah, so I mean, you can download if you go to your favorite app store, Google Play, you can download the Viz.AI training app. That's the demo, and basically it shows the basic functionality. So it simulates getting the alert, viewing the scans on the phone, the chat functionality. So we can sort of get a look and feel. It's mostly for physicians.
Yeah.
They want to know sort of what to expect when they install the product. But anyone can play with it. It pretty much shows the functionality.
Yeah, and they don't need like that the hospital will install something, like they can understand from the demo on their app what is going on.
Yeah, because I mean they have the context, right? If someone is a stroke specialist, they know what's going on, and typically it's not it's also typically part of a conversation. So typically in a conversation, they download the demo, you sort of walk them through it, so you give the full context. That's typically how we do it.
Okay, David, thank you for the interview. It's very interesting.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's really one of those things I like that I'm trying to deliver to the audience, the perception that you can do something with aging and to prevent the damage. How important that there is something to do. I try to. I will give one example on myself. Like before I started this podcast, that my perception of, like, let's say, gene therapy was that like if someone told me about gene therapy, I started to imagine like something that you need to put a gene on someone, like to discover what this gene is doing, and like you need a technology to put it in a person, and you need to make it safe enough, and that it will be you can do it on humans and everything, and it sounds to me like science fiction. And what I discovered that there is another path for drug development in gene therapy, that you can try to imitate what the gene does and try to activate it in the body, the process. So this is a shift of perception that is more tangible, like for me, and
Yeah.
and this is what I want to the audience to understand, that maybe be open-minded, find the ways to maintain the body healthy, and for investor, of course,
Yes.
to start investing in the longevity field. And your products already provides a service that can at least maintain the body much healthier, and this is a way to go. And I want to thank you for going to this direction and joining to my podcast. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you.